and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive interviews with leading experts every weekday here on Arabiya English. I'm Tom Burges Watson. Coming up in today's programme, all eyes back on the war in Ukraine with no breakthrough on peace negotiations still. Ukraine is said to be preparing a new revised peace plan to submit to Washington. This follows on from President Zelensky's talks in Europe. He said he's unwilling to give up any territory. We ask, is there any chance of any peace anytime soon? We'll also be focusing on Lebanon as Israel's military confirms it has struck more Hezbollah facilities inside southern Lebanon. Plus, we'll take a look back at President Putin's visit to India and find out what emerged from it and what the state of ties is between Moscow and New Delhi. Hello and welcome to the programme. We begin with Ukraine as President Volodymyr Zelenskyy is preparing to present a revised peace plan to the White House. Well, on Monday, President Zelenskyy met the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, the French President Emmanuel Macron and the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz in London. This to discuss the latest version of a peace plan drafted between the Ukrainian and US officials last week. Well, President Zelenskyy says Ukraine has no legal or moral right to give up land to Russia in any deal aimed at ending Moscow's nearly 4-year-long invasion. Well, there's been no breakthrough in the peace talks, despite the recent talks between US and Russian officials in Moscow. Meanwhile, Russia's top military general claims that his forces are advancing on the entire front line in Ukraine and that they've surrounded Ukrainian troops in the town of Minarad. Well, we're joined now by Dr. Chris Parry, who's a former Rear Admiral and former NATO commander. He joins us from Portsmouth in the United Kingdom. Dr. Parry, thank you very much for joining us once again here on Arabiya English. President Zelenskyy has been holding these talks in London. They happened yesterday. The British Prime Minister was there, the French President, the German Chancellor. And presumably they've got very different messages for Ukraine than what Washington has been saying to Ukraine. Sir Keir Starmer said that progress was made at those talks. But I want to ask you, what's your opinion? What difference do you think this kind of European effort will ultimately make to the negotiation process?
Well, I think we have to recognise that this agreement, if it ever comes, is going to be framed by the United States and Russia. Ukraine, of course, is caught between the upper and the nether millstone here. What the Europeans are trying to do is say, look, we are going to continue to support Ukraine. How best can we do it? But also at the same time, how can we actually provide leverage for Ukraine in this big sort of setup between the United States and Russia?
Right, and we've heard President Zelenskyy, presumably feeling very supported by his European allies. Russia insists we're going to give up territory, but we won't. And when Washington hears that, they're just going to think we're back to square one, aren't they?
I think, Tom, we're in a negotiating phase now. I mean, we're not seeing the end of the game, and so everybody is obviously playing tough. They're going for maximalist demands at this stage, and it's the erosion of those maximalist demands that will result in some sort of peace. Now, the big worry for Europeans right now is that you might get an armistice or a peace with Russia at the moment, but actually Russia will just come back a year later when it's recovered, it's refreshed its armaments, and it's actually got more manpower. And everybody sees echoes of what happened in Europe just before the Second World War when Hitler basically did exactly the same, said he wanted a bit of Czechoslovakia. He was given a bit of Czechoslovakia in return for peace because the rest of Europe wasn't ready to take on Germany at the time. And then 9 months later, he marched into the rest of Czechoslovakia. And so that image is in European leaders' minds at the moment. At the same time, Europe's not ready to fight Russia if Russia decides to actually widen the conflict, or indeed, of course, refuses to recognize the legitimacy of the peace process if Zelenskyy remains in power. Some of the rhetoric right now is suggesting that Russia doesn't want Zelenskyy to stay in power beyond any peace settlement.
Right, and I mean, I'm just wondering whether we could also run the risk of reaching a point where the United States says this is a huge commitment of our time and resources, and they just walk away from the negotiating table. Do you think that is a risk? And what would be some of the associated hazards of reaching that point?
Tom, I think they're almost saying that now. I mean, I think President Trump's agenda is that any future security in Europe relating to Ukraine is left to the Europeans, whether that's in terms of obviously supporting financially and morally Ukraine continuing the fight, or indeed providing wider security for Ukraine within a European model. I think we've discussed before, Tom, that the Americans see that China is their pacing threat and homeland security is their pacing scenario. And what I think President Trump wants is responsibility for peace and stability in Europe within an overall framework that has been established between Russia and the United States. I think he wants the Europeans to take on the burden of that security and that of the Americans to diminish over time.
Right, but it's quite confusing because on the one hand, President Trump views China as being a threat. But China is actually, China has a hand in what's happening in Ukraine, according to reports, and it's offered a fair amount of support to Russia, financial, and also by helping it to circumnavigate some of the sanctions that are in place. So handing territory to Russia and perceiving to give Russia a victory in this is, by extension, giving victory to China, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. There is a perception that could be the case. I mean, what we have to, I think, establish in our minds is the fact for the last 5 years or so, two power blocks have been emerging. That's Russia, China, Iran, North Korea acting together. I call them the Eurasian autocrats. And they have both collective and individual interests in the continent of Eurasia and the waters around it. So Russia's interests, of course, are projected towards the Baltic and the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. China's is in the Indo-Pacific region. North Korea has its issue with South Korea. And until it was smashed by Israel, of course, Iran had its greater Persian agenda in the Middle East and the region where you are now. So that has been opposed, I think, in a very loose way by what I call the maritime democracies. That's the United States, Canada, parts of Europe, United Kingdom, of course, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, South Korea, and I think in a sort of midway, sort of India as well. Now, every other country at the moment is trying to establish their relationship to that sort of dual block relationship. I think the countries that want development are tending towards the Eurasian autocrats, the countries that want security and the rule of law probably tending towards the maritime democracies. But overlaying that, you've got the BRICS countries, and of course the UAE and countries in the greater Middle East have an interest in that as well. So it's slightly complicated, but you're absolutely right, Tom. Most of the armaments that Russia is using right now are being provided by China, North Korea, and Iran. So if you're fighting any of these or confronting any of these countries, you're going to end up having the others lined up behind them. There's no question about that. But what's happening in Eurasia is they're supporting each other's territorial and geographic interests. As I said, Russia towards the Baltic and the Black Sea, and the others are supporting China in the Indo-Pacific, and so it goes on. And I think we have to get used to that fact. And we're in a world of great power conflict here. So middle countries have to, as I said, sort out how they sit in relationship to those two big blocks.
And just looking at Ukraine specifically again and the situation on the battlefield, I mean, Russia's been claiming for a while, for the last few days, that it's captured this city of Pokrovsk. Not clear that they actually have done. But what is your understanding of what the current situation is?
Well, as far as Pokrovsk is concerned, Tom, I think what you're seeing is that you've got a major frontal assault on Pokrovsk, and around the sides of it and in the rear, you've got infiltration by Russian special units and also some of their smaller assault units as well. It's taking a real pounding from aviation, artillery and drones as well. But that whole front right now is really suffering from the Russian point of view from a shortage of manpower. They're pounding it, certainly they are, with artillery, with aviation and drones. And as you well know, just to the north of Pokrovsk, you've got this fortress belt, and it consists of the cities of Slovyansk, Kramatorsk, and Druzhkivka. And these are the cities and the area that Russia really wants as part of the negotiation. The reason they want it is it's heavily fortified. And somebody calculated a while ago that if they really wanted to capture these in battle, it would probably cost them about 800,000 troops in killed, wounded. And so that is a price they don't want to pay. And this is a time when Russia economically and militarily is actually beginning to feel the pain. And there are people that I talk to, academics and military, who say, look, we've just got to hold firm right now. We've got to call Russia's bluff. And President Putin's going to come to terms because he can't afford to go through to the next campaigning season in the state he's in at the moment.
Dr. Parry, do you think there's a concerted effort on the part of the European allies of Ukraine, like the ones who were assembled at Downing Street yesterday, to somehow put Ukraine in the strongest possible position on the battlefield, in the knowledge that it would give Ukraine a strengthened hand at the negotiating table? Do you think that's happening?
Oh, I think that's, I think that's very perceptive, Tom. Yeah, I think that's exactly the case. Just as Russia at the moment is trying to get as much battlefield advantage as possible, despite its limitations, the Europeans are trying to stand behind President Zelenskyy and say, right, just face up to him. Now, the problem's going to occur is if, as you hinted earlier, the Americans say, look, we're bored with this. It's ridiculous. You're acting like children. We're going to walk away from this. And of course, the Europeans are left holding the baby. And there is a campaigning season that starts in April next year. And of course, Zelenskyy is going to turn around and say, well, you promised me the support. What are you going to do? One thing I'm sure about is that the Europeans are not going to commit troops in any capacity whatsoever. The Russians don't want troops in Ukraine. I think what they'll push for is some sort of security guarantee for Ukraine that guarantees the borders. But without the Americans, I don't see how they're going to enforce it.
And when you look at the overall picture and this split in approaches to Ukraine that now exists between the Europeans on one side, the Americans on the other side, I mean, it must suit Russia very well to see divisions emerging. And I mean, they weren't, I mean, I think there was a pretty united front, wasn't there, until about a year ago on the subject of Ukraine.
Yeah, I mean, I think President Putin will be delighted to see the split between the two elements of NATO, for example. But I think, he mustn't get too complacent about it. NATO's still pretty strong. And we've got to remember that Ukraine wasn't a NATO country. It isn't a NATO country. So the same guarantees don't apply to Ukraine that would apply to, say, Finland or the Baltic states if something happened there. My own view is that President Putin does want to apply the pressure to other European states once he's finished or stabilized in Ukraine. And he'll be looking next at the Baltic region. As I said, the two neuroses that really, for the last 150, 200 years, have really played on the Russian mind is somehow there's instability, or indeed they can't control the Baltic or the Black Sea. Well, going into Ukraine, partly was to control the Black Sea. There are other reasons as well, including seizing the agricultural oil and gas resources, and more importantly, the population resources. One of the big drumbeats right now from the Russians is they're not actually producing enough children. So if they take over Ukraine, they take over millions of people as well who sort of look like Russians, and that means a lot to them. You go to the Baltic. They've got unfinished business there. They used to control most of the Baltic coastline during the Cold War. That's not the case anymore. And they're even more upset that Finland and Sweden have joined NATO as a result of the Ukraine war. So they're feeling very insecure in the Baltic. And I suspect that's where they're going to go next to try and do what they've done around Ukraine.
Yeah, I wonder if preemptive action is being taken in the Baltic with that scenario in mind. And just lastly, Dr. Parry, and briefly, if you don't mind, I mean, on Friday, the United States published this national security strategy document. What do you think the reaction has been to that in the UK and in Europe generally?
Well, of course, the immediate reaction was is this America first or is this America alone? Well, if you read it and you read between the lines, this is simply America saying, look, we're going to have China as our pacing threat, as I had said earlier. If we've got the capacity to help our allies, we're going to do so, but only if they invest in their own defense and they haven't destabilized their own societies. You'll see there's a very heavy hint that they will only support countries that support their values and their civilizational criteria. That's the first time we've ever seen that in an American security strategy. In the past, of course, they've gone out there and they've helped mankind, they've helped all sorts of human rights causes, international law, all that sort of thing. It's not like that anymore. The Americans are saying it's America first. If we've got capacity and if we think you're actually pulling your weight in civilizational and military terms, we'll come and help you as well. That's what it's saying. And I think it's no surprise, Tom, you know, for the last 10 years, we've seen the Americans saying we're fed up with Europeans freeloading on essentially what is nearly $1 trillion a year defense budget in the United States. You know, that's lots of hospitals, schools, and other social programs that we could be putting in place if only the Europeans pulled their weight. And the real message is, if you want our support, this is the Americans speaking, if you want our support, if you want to be our allies, you've got to match us in terms of muscular diplomacy and indeed muscular nationalism as well.
Okay, well, we really appreciate you taking the time to share that with us. Dr. Chris Parry, thank you very much indeed for your time. Let's get more now. We can speak to Alexander Khara, who is the former advisor to the Ministry of Defence in Ukraine and also a fellow at the Centre for Defence Strategies. Thank you so much for joining us. Always a pleasure talking to you. I would like to just start by asking about the talks that were held in London on Monday. And we've also seen President Zelenskyy meeting with the NATO chief, Mark Rutte, the EU chief, Ursula von der Leyen, today in Italy meeting the Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. What do you think is the desired effect of this show of European solidarity, do you think?
Hello, Tom. First of all, let me put it in a wider context. There is no single sign of Russia willing to stop this war. And they're trying to use all tools available to undermine any real peace talks. In the beginning of this year, Trump was threatening Russia with tariffs if Putin is not to agree on the ceasefire. And then they met in Alaska, and after that meeting, Mr. Trump made a U-turn. He gave up this idea of the ceasefire and didn't impose any tariffs on Russia. The same thing happened with the 28-point plan. The Europeans were about to decide the fate of immobilized Russian assets in Belgium, and Putin and his people just released this plan, allegedly developed along with the Americans, even though if you read it, it's a bad translation from Russian into English. So it seems to me that in context of the recent issues of the national security strategy of the United States, it's obvious that Europe is irrelevant for the United States, not to mention Ukraine. And this administration would gladly pass on this issue to Europeans and just like resolve it in any way and then focus on something else. And that's why they try to exert some pressure. And here we comes to these talks of Mr. Zelenskyy with European leaders, with EU structures, with NATO Secretary General. We are trying to rally behind us the support of Europeans, because our future and the results of this war will greatly affect the whole security architecture in Europe for years to come. And that's why we are natural allies with European partners. And that's why we are trying to speak in one voice with our American partners who are criticizing Europe, who are actually declared a political war against Europe. So this is the reason why Zelenskyy is touring Europe and meeting all those people and trying to promote a negotiated with European partners a version of a peace plan that is acceptable to Ukraine.
Right. Is it going to be acceptable to Washington, though? Because the latest peace plan that Ukraine is submitting to the United States, it seems not to include any mention of ceding territory. And I'm just wondering how you think Washington will react to a plan like that.
Well, we don't care how they will react to our unwillingness not to cede an inch of Ukrainian territory, internationally recognized, and actually by Russia itself. And actually, the so-called Budapest Memorandum of 1994 got security assurances from the United States, from Russia, and some other countries that neither Ukrainian sovereignty nor territorial integrity or political stability would be undermined by the undersigned parties. And now Mr. Trump and his friends, because no, they don't have official positions, like his son-in-law Jared Kushner or his business partner Steve Witkoff, they want Ukraine to cede territory in return for nothing, because we do not believe, first and foremost, we do not believe that ceding any territory will bring any type of peace to Ukraine. Second thing, we cannot do that for many reasons, starting from the constitution to the humanitarian issues. I'm a native of Donetsk city that has been occupied by Russia since 2014. And my compatriots from that region has been converted into Russian soldiers, and they were thrown into the battle and they were killed fighting for Russia. And the same thing will happen to all those men and women that are living on the temporary occupied territory of Russia that Russia wants to be to incorporate in its state. So it's completely unacceptable, not just for Ukrainians, not just for Europeans, but the whole world. If it's possible to conquer someone's territory, why the other guys, bad guys across the globe, would not try to do that if aggression pays off? So it's not just interest of Ukraine not to cede that territory, but for the rest of the world to support Ukraine, not to do so, and to deter Mr. Trump from recognizing this illegal annexation of Ukraine's territory.
On Sunday, President Trump said he was disappointed in President Zelenskyy. I mean, that's just the latest in what's been, quite a roller coaster of exchanges between Kyiv and Washington. Lots of shifts in the Trump administration's attitude towards Kyiv. Where are we right now, in your opinion?
Well, there are some bumps and roads, bumps and ups and downs, on this road. Well, we get used to it. We understand that there is inconsistency in Mr. Trump's policies, because during his first term of office, there was a Pompeo declaration that set the policy of the United States to never recognize the illegal annexation of Crimea. But now Americans are talking about forcing Ukraine to recognize the illegal annexation of Crimea and some other territories. But there are some times, and particularly after the meeting with Ukrainian officials, that Mr. Trump is on Ukrainian side, and he says that he is interested in supporting sovereignty of Ukraine and that Ukraine should be a prosperous European state. So I don't think that it's a final decision in the mind of Mr. Trump and his surrounding regarding Ukraine. He may change that, let's say, position. He believes that the size of the country dictates the rules, that Russia is big, and that's why it can do genocide in Ukraine and get along with all those things that it's committed here, which is not true. Russia has been beaten many times in history, and it's possible for Ukraine to do so. At least it's not a position, Ukraine is not in a position to give up those territories that Russians are not able to conquer anytime soon.
I mean, there's a risk, isn't there, that the United States walks away from the negotiation efforts, the peace efforts, and says, right, you're on your own. I mean, that would be pretty dangerous for not just Ukraine, but the whole of Europe, wouldn't it?
Well, there are some let's say, issues related to that. But look, this administration didn't provide Ukraine with a single penny of assistance. Actually, in the new coming National Defense Authorization Act for 2026, there is $400 million for assistance to Ukraine. But you cannot compare it to the assistance that has been provided by previous administration and previous Congress. So this administration is not helping us at all. Secondly, every piece of equipment that we got from Americans now are either bought by Ukrainian money, it's not a big share of the sales, or by our European and other partners. So Americans are interested in getting money out of this war. And finally, Mr. Trump understands if something terrible happens to Ukraine on his watch, it will be Afghanistan 2.0 and politically devastating for his party's future, and particularly given the ratings and what's going on within the party ranks before the midterm elections in November next year. So I don't think that he will risk politically in domestic affairs trying to push Ukraine under the Russian bus. So yes, we will be in difficult position, and particularly if Americans would cut intelligence sharing that we need to see the early warning of the Russian launch of Russian missiles and drones. But it doesn't mean that we will be not able to defend ourselves, and it doesn't mean that we will be ready to cede territory and to agree on any limitation of our sovereignty.
What do you think Russia thinks when it sees splits emerging in the relationship and the resolve of the Europeans and the Americans? How do you think that's viewed by President Putin and by officials in Moscow?
Everyone who knows the Russian thinking, they hate the West in general, democracy, and in Europe, united Europe and the United States. And certainly they try to play that and try to exploit differences in vision. Recently, I was struck by the number of MAGA people praising Mr. Dugin, one of the fascist philosophers of Russia, who actually made up his so-called philosophical and geopolitical views just to undermine the collective West. And they praise him, and they believe that Russia is a Christian conservative country, and it's better to be buddies with Russia rather than with Europe. So it's beyond my comprehension. But anyway, the Russian has been working on that. They've been trying to interfere in elections in different countries, including the United States, and it has been proven, particularly via the social networks and some operators, engage in and supporting some candidates in the United States, in France, in some other countries as well. So there is a political warfare going on between Russia, or from the Russian side to Europe and against the United States, and unfortunately, those countries are not fighting back. They're trying to be on defense, and they are losing this battle of information and psychological warfare. So the Russians are happy. They see that Europe is not capable to rise up to the challenge, while the United States are not interested in being engaged in Europe anymore.
Okay, and just lastly, before we wrap up, we're being told, according to some of the news reports, that Russia has captured the city of Pokrovsk, although Ukraine disputes this, and there have been some signs of Ukrainian flags in Pokrovsk in the last day or two. What's your understanding of the situation there and more broadly on the battlefield?
Well, it's a difficult situation. Well, there is no reason for me or anyone from Ukraine to hide it. But when we are talking about what's going on in that part of Ukraine, we are trying to trade the many Russian lives for each and every meter of well-fortified urban building. The city setting. And yes, the Russians are in control of a major part of the city, but they do not control it as a whole. And we are inflicting great damage to their material and to their manpower. And the only way how we can fight this war and this strategic defense operation can be carried out. And actually, one of the reasons why we cannot agree to cede the territory of Donetsk region is because there are a couple of other cities as fortresses that we should not provide Russia with an opportunity to strengthen themselves and then have the possibility to attack other regions of Ukraine, like Kharkiv or Dnipropetrovsk. So that's why there is no any chance of Zelensky of agreeing to cede those territories without a fight, or to legally recognize them as being Russian. So we are going to fight tooth and nail because it's the war of our survival. There is an absolutely clear genocidal character of the war. We've seen it in Mariupol and many other cities and towns and villages. So we cannot just give up and live peacefully under the Russian occupation.
Okay, well, we're going to have to leave it there, but we really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. Alexander
Thank you for having me.
Former advisor to the Minister of Defence in Ukraine. Thank you very much indeed for your time, sir. Now, turning our attention to the Middle East, and Israel has launched a new wave of airstrikes on southern Lebanon, straining a fragile US-brokered ceasefire agreed on between Israel and Hezbollah. Well, according to the Israeli military, it struck several sites linked to Hezbollah, including a special operations training compound, which is used by Hezbollah's elite forces. Well, let's get the latest on the situation. We can speak now to Ihab Matar, who is a Lebanese MP who joins us from Beirut. Mr. Matar, thank you very much indeed for joining us. So Israel saying it has struck these Hezbollah sites in southern Lebanon today. I mean, does it look to you like we're looking at an escalation here, or is this very much in line with what we've seen over these last 12 months or so?
Thank you for having me. Now, obviously, the fact that a civilian has been added to the negotiating team should de-escalate the situation. What we see is, in our view, in line with the process that's been happening since the cessation of hostility in November 2024. Now, ultimately, we believe that the negotiating committee, if it does end up progressing in a positive manner, should diffuse the situation, or at least should help in working towards a cessation of hostility altogether. So we don't believe that we are seeing an escalation to the already escalated situation in the region.
Okay, we're obviously approaching the end of the year, and there's an important deadline looming, which is the 31st of December, which was the deadline the Lebanese government was given to disarm Hezbollah. Do you think Lebanon's going to be able to meet that target?
Now, the dates we're looking at the moment is that before the 31st, we're looking at the 19th of December. This is the second meeting of the negotiating committee. And then we have hopes that with that meeting, we'll start to really see exactly whether we're going to be able to progress towards an agreement of some sort. At least, even an agreement to work towards a truce. Obviously, we're not talking about peace. We're not talking about normalization between us and Israel, but we're talking about a truce. Now, the deadline of 31st of December that was initially, placed by the army, we will have the report by the 5th of January. The general of the Lebanese army will give his report on the 5th of January to advise, which we hope will have the complete disarming of the region south of Litani. So if that's met, and if the report is positive that south of Litani has been completely disarmed, that means we are actually in line with the stages that the Lebanese army has actually put in the plan. And then after that, obviously, we'll have to move to the second stage. Second stage is obviously talking about north of Litani, which is obviously a bit more difficult in our view, that south of Litani can pretty much be done, and we believe it's going to get done on time. But north of Litani, it's going to cause a lot more issues, because we believe at this stage that Hezbollah is refusing to concede, that there's no way that they're going to keep any of the arms, whether it's south of Litani or north of Litani. So I guess what we'll have to see, whether Hezbollah will be cooperating with the Lebanese army and with the Lebanese government for the disarming of north of Litani.
Okay, I want to ask you about what the Lebanese government is saying about these sorts of attacks, the kind of which we've seen in the south of Lebanon during the last 12 months. In public, they denounce these attacks and say it's an infringement on Lebanese sovereignty. But I'm wondering whether in private they sort of approve of these attacks, because essentially what Israel is doing is what they've been told to do, which is to try to somehow stamp out Hezbollah. Do you think that's the reality?
I believe, Tom, in private, the government and most representatives are actually saying the same thing they are saying in public. Obviously, we are denouncing these attacks because despite knowing that Hezbollah has not fully cooperated in terms of voluntarily surrendering their arms, but we don't believe that an attack, we don't believe that hostilities should be the way to go. We still believe that we should allow the Lebanese forces enough time to be able to defuse the situation, to be able to disarm south of Litani without having to threaten people's lives, and then without having to attack the the buildings and then the lands in the south of Litani. So technically, the government is not really happy about what's been done by Israel. And then obviously we always ask Israel to refrain from attacking Lebanese territories and Lebanese people, because we should allow for the Lebanese forces, for the Lebanese armed forces, the army, LAF, to do their job. And then the first checkpoint is the 31st of December. So we believe that Israel should wait until that date and then should see the progress of the disarming of the south of Litani before any further attacks can be launched.
I mean, Israel's obviously tried to destroy Hezbollah for many years. And last year, they had a number of intelligence coups. And of course, they managed to kill the head of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah. How strong is Hezbollah looking at the moment? Do you think they've regrouped and somehow rebuilt some of their strength in these last 12 months?
Absolutely not. Now, Hezbollah is weaker than ever, especially after the attacks that they've conceded. But let me go back to the point where obviously the 1701 resolution states that both parties, Israel and Hezbollah, should refrain from attacking each other. And the cessation of fire agreement on the 27th of November 2024 mentions the same. So now we believe, obviously, with Israel attacking, that they're not really complying with the agreement, the cessation of hostility agreement. To go back to Hezbollah, obviously Hezbollah is weaker than ever. They've conceded that the attack on them was greater than they expected, was imminent. I mean, most people in Lebanon, in terms of politicians, have been warning Hezbollah that if they don't stop the supporting measures in Gaza, then we're going to get attacked. And we did, in fact, get attacked. So now Hezbollah, I don't believe Hezbollah has the ability to be able to rearm itself. I don't believe Hezbollah has the ability to be able to regroup. I think Hezbollah now is in a state where they know that they're losing confidence from the supporters. They know they've lost confidence from the people of Lebanon. So they're trying somehow to save face. And this is another opportunity for Hezbollah to be able to comply with all the decisions made by the government, because we believe that the government, the Lebanese government, is the only and the sole body responsible for ensuring the safety and security of Lebanon and of the people of Lebanon.
Yeah, only a couple of weeks ago, it was on the 23rd of November, Israel carried out a strike on one of the Beirut suburbs and killed Haytham Ali Tabtabai. And he was, of course, a top military commander, wasn't he, within Hezbollah. What do you think the message is that Israel is trying to send to Hezbollah with these occasional surgical strikes that it carries out on the leadership and on Hezbollah infrastructure?
Well, the message is clear. The message is you are under constant surveillance and you are under constant attack if you don't voluntarily comply with the decisions by the Lebanese government. Now, obviously, the decision by the Lebanese government, this is the will of the Lebanese people, of the whole population of Lebanon, are behind the government at the moment, are behind the decisions that the government is taking, obviously with the exception of the supporters of Hezbollah, which in my opinion have become a minority, and their numbers are diminishing every day, as long as they see that Hezbollah, with its stubborn approach to refuse the resolutions and to refuse the compliance of the government, it's causing more damage and more issues to them. So the message is very clear that you are not protected. Hezbollah, its supporters, its leaders, its interest is not supported anymore. They are under attack. They are under surveillance. So unless they comply with the decisions by the government, there's going to always be a threat for them to get attacked and for the interest to get attacked. And obviously, our main concern here is that innocent lives could be lost if Hezbollah doesn't really comply with what the government is deciding. And again, the decision of the government is for the interest of the Lebanese people. And part of that will be the interest of supporters of Hezbollah, whether they like it or not. When the Lebanese government takes a decision to protect its people, by default, supporters of Hezbollah who are in Lebanon will get this kind of protection. Obviously, our goal is to make sure that Hezbollah loses the trust of as many people as possible, because we believe that the direction that Hezbollah has been going and has been taking its people, it's been causing heartache not only to their followers and their supporters and their interests, but to the, obviously, population of Lebanon at large.
Okay, well, there was lots of other questions I wanted to ask you, but I'm afraid we're out of time. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us, Ihab Matar, Lebanese MP. Thank you so much. Now, preparations are well underway in Oslo ahead of the Nobel Peace Prize ceremony, which is going to be held at City Hall tomorrow. Well, the winner of this year's prize is María Corina Machado. She was nominated for her fight against dictatorship in Venezuela. Well, Machado's mother and daughter have both been spotted in the Norwegian capital, but will Machado herself be in attendance? We can find out more now. I'm joined here in the studio by Catalina Marchant de Abreu, who's a presenter here on Al Arabiya English. Catalina, welcome to the program. You've interviewed Machado, and we're going to talk about that a bit more in just a moment. But first of all, the ceremony is going to be held tomorrow. Do we know if Machado herself will be there in Oslo to accept the award?
Well, Tom, there's been lots of speculation over whether María Corina Machado will be able to accept her award in person in tomorrow's prize ceremony taking place in Oslo. Sources within Machado's team confirmed to me just yesterday that she will be traveling to Norway to receive her Peace Prize, the first ever for Venezuela. And this is expected to be Machado's first public appearance in over 11 months. Now let's remind our viewers that this is a significant development, as she has been living in hiding in her country since August 2024. And the Venezuelan government has said that Machado will be considered a political fugitive if she leaves the country. Hence, given the sense of security of this entire situation, we can't really disclose any more details of how she will arrive or how she plans to return to her country once the ceremony concludes, a trip that nonetheless could mean exile for the opposition leader.
Okay, so you've been in touch with Machado's team. You've also been in touch with Machado herself because you interviewed her along with Patrick Weissman, who is the director of the French quarterly magazine Politique Internationale. You did an in-depth interview that's being published in France today. Just talk us through some of the key points that you discussed with her.
Well, Tom, before diving into the facts, we actually discussed Machado's Freedom Manifesto, published on November 18th and written by her, outlining Machado's, let's say, commandments for what a future democratic Venezuela would look like, or will look like. So where she also highlights the most important human rule of law, which is freedom and dignity as the guiding principle. The opposition leader also discusses 12 different points, including the future of regenerating the country's economy, freedom of speech, freedom of the right to vote, the right to assemble, to safety, crimes against humanity, reinstalling education in the country, amongst others, as the final goal, she says, is to return to the international community of democracies and, of course, see whether Venezuela can move beyond dictatorship. If you or our viewers also wish, you can read the entire Freedom Manifesto written by Machado, posted on our website at alarabiya.net.
Okay, so tell us what would be the stages, the political stages of a democratic transition, such as the one that Machado has been calling for.
Well, María Corina Machado says that the first stages of this transition will be the fall of the current regime, Maduro, under a combined effect of internal and international pressure, a moment that the opposition hopes will be the result of negotiation. However, she says the regime has never respected any type of agreement, such agreement, so no hope for that for now. The next 100 days will be decisive, she says. The democratic forces of Venezuela need to reestablish the most basic public policies such as security, infrastructure, health, education, rapidly win international recognition for the new regime and put in place this international cooperation, a plan that the opposition has been actually planning for years. The plans and the teams are ready for this transition into democracy for Venezuela.
Okay, Catalina, that brings us to another question I wanted to ask you. Once in power, did you get a sense of what sort of things Machado might do? Did she give you any ideas about what her top priorities would be?
She did. Machado says that together with President-elect Edmundo González, their first orders will be to immediately free all political prisoners, to restore freedom of expression, association, and demonstration. At the same time, she says their priority in power will actually be the country's finances, hence to clean up public finances, restructure debt, and integrate Venezuela into the international financial system, which means open up the economy to foreign investment, transforming Venezuela into what is today a hub, she says, of organized crime, into the continent's energy and technological powerhouse.
Okay, and obviously Venezuela's been in the headlines quite a bit, hasn't it, in the last few days. And when it comes to the international community, what countries did Machado say would be sort of the privileged allies of this future democratic Venezuela?
That's right. Venezuela's main priority is actually a comeback to the international community after so many years of authoritarianism and isolation since Maduro took office in 2013, who she says has currently no more than 10% of the support of the Venezuelan population. In this regard, Machado mentions the support of countries of Latin America, the United States, Canada, the Caribbean, and the European Union. Machado also says that Israel will be a key partner in their transition to democracy, expecting also to maintain excellent relations with major Asian and Middle Eastern powers.
Okay, and just lastly, I mean, in your interview with Machado, you got pretty personal in your discussion. Did she give you a sense of what sort of some of the hardships had been, particularly some painful moments she might have experienced in her political journey? And I also wonder how she reacted when she found out she was this year's Nobel Peace Prize winner.
Exactly, Tom. In this interview, we asked Machado which was the most difficult or painful moment for her, where she said where she almost gave up. Of course, she mentions when the Maduro regime illegally disqualified her from the 2024 presidential election, even though she had won 93% of the vote. Fast forward now, she is the 2025 Nobel Peace Prize winner, so her sacrifice didn't go unnoticed by the international community. Her initial reactions, she says, was of total surprise, and she says she still can't believe it. It's hard to believe. A prize with which she hopes to win greater support for the country's space in the democratic world that Venezuelans were once a part of.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for talking us through all of that. Catalina Marchant Abreu from Arabiya's English service, thank you very much indeed to you. And just for our viewers, a press conference that was supposed to happen today with the Nobel Peace Prize laureate María Corina Machado has been postponed. It may take place later on. That's according to the Nobel Institute. The press conference traditionally held by the Nobel laureate on the eve of the ceremony is expected to be for the 58-year-old's first public appearance in 11 months. She appeared in public at a demonstration in Caracas on the 9th of January, protesting against the inauguration of President Nicolas Maduro for his third term. Do stay tuned. We'll bring you more on that story. Now, we're going to take a closer look at last week's visit to India by the Russian President Vladimir Putin. The two leaders, who share a long-standing personal and professional relationship, held their first meeting in India since the start of the war in Ukraine. Well, despite global tensions, including sanctions on Russia over Ukraine and Western pressure on India concerning Russian oil, both sides highlighted their ongoing cooperation, sending a clear signal that their strategic partnership remains strong. Well, let's take a look now at an interview I recorded earlier on in the week. Well, for more, we can speak now to Tawqueer Hussain, who is a senior journalist who covers foreign affairs based out of New Delhi. Tawqueer, thank you very much indeed for joining us on Al Arabiya English. Let's talk about that two-day visit to India by President Putin. Was it a success, and what came out of it?
Tom, thanks for having me on the show. I think the visit was quite a success for the India, because you understand that the compulsions that the world is facing right now, and India is one of those countries that has been quite affected by the tariffs, to be honestly on the front. But what happened with the Putin coming to India, it was a remarkable visit for the Indian diplomacy, and in a way that it showed the balanced nature of the India's outreach in the world. And what Putin brought to the Indian table was quite remarkable, and I think the visit concluded quite successfully, because India had an economic partnership for 2030. They managed that they assured that their trade, which is now the most important conflicting issue right now, that they are going to raise it to $100 billion. And there were a lot of exchanges. There were 16 MOUs that were signed to with the government, and 14 on the private partnerships. And there is that President Putin has offered India an uninterrupted supply of the fuel, which there was no such open such agreement on those fronts. But yes, he has given that hope to the India that he is open to giving all sort of the energy security that India is looking for. And in terms of the defense, that was bit of a disappointing point, because there were a lot of the understandings and a lot of the optimism that there will be a strong defense deal between the two leaders. But on the defense front, we didn't hear anything much on that, since maybe in the power corridors, it could be that defense is one of the important issue that could not go well with the United States as of now. Maybe that has been shadowed in this front. But economically, yes, it was a good and a successful visit, because they had a mobility agreement where skilled and non-skilled workers from the India can go to the United States. You know that, but there is one of the issues that is about that they will not be enrolled for the defense. India is already having some of the issues with it, because some of the Indian people who went to Russia, they were enrolled for the military, and some of them are missing. And I think if the reports are true, and MEA has once stated that one of them has been killed on the Ukrainian front. So they are quite obvious in those fronts that their people should not be sent to the Ukrainian front. But overall, the visit have been quite successful. It looks confident, it looked bold, and it looked like a statement that the two leaders sent to the world that the Russia-India partnership is always strong, it is strategic, it's important, and for both the countries, it's very, very good.
Okay, yeah, I was going to ask you, because I mean, we often speak on this channel to the Indian MP, Shashi Tharoor, and he wrote an opinion piece for NDTV in which he said the India-Russia relationship is strategic, not simply transactional. It sounds like you'd agree with that assessment.
Absolutely, it is strategic because it is not the relationship that developed just within months. It's an old age. We say in India that it's an old age relationship, and it is a relationship that's based on the mutual respect, on the trust. Because there was at one point of time when India's entire defense arsenal, particularly, was exactly Russian. 60% of our defense requirements were Russian. Though India is trying to be the indigenous now, technology is going, but Russia is also coming forefront in that matter as well, because Russia is offering the transfer of technology to India. See, that gives us an essence of the strategically important those two countries are. Russia giving its latest and advanced technology to India is quite something remarkable, which the West has been often ignored. West has been ready to give the weapons to India, but not the technology. And Russia is open in that front because Russia understands India as its core strategic partner. For example, we saw during when the crisis happened in India in the last May, we saw during the Pakistan and the India conflict that Russian S-400, one of the powerful defense systems that India acquired, despite that there has been delays in its deliveries because of the Ukraine war, and now we see that was the front weapon for the India to thwart any of the Pakistani aggression. So that's strategically important. We say that the defense was there. There's an important in the agriculture sector, fertilizer imports. That's quite a bit remarkable. You understand that India's economy is mostly agricultural, and we have the huge, vast rural economy that supports the India's GDP. So all of this supporting each other in every front, in every domain, I think that is quite strategic in its front.
Yeah, one of the other things that Dr. Thoreau said in his opinion piece is he said India's engagement with Russia is, quote, not without risks. And I'm wondering whether you think one of the risks is the risk of upsetting the Americans. Do you think New Delhi has come under pressure from Washington to perhaps put a bit of distance between itself and the Russians?
See, one understanding is that, yes, obvious, we have suffered because of Russia. There is no doubt in that, because we are having, I think, one of the world's largest tariff from the United States because of our association with Russia. But on the other front, we have to understand this thing in a quite bigger format. Russia-India relationship is not only because of the United States. We have another own ideas, our own threats that we need to take care of, like being the China. Russia-India-China relationship. You understand, India-China relationship is blinking towards normalcy, but it is not normal. And Russia is the one factor who is close to China, and often we can use that diplomacy, how it works. But coming back to the United States, Trump, what he did to the India, being a close partner, you understand the first term of the Trump when he called Modi his friend, even in the second term, but then India became one of the country which faced the highest tariff from that friend. But what it means, the India often says that having any relationship with Russia is not itself a counter to any other relationships that India has with the other countries. Every relationship has its merits and demerits. And with Russia, we have been, I think the relationship has been more on the merits, more on the requirements. Even if we take like India, like India has been accused of that we are taking we are giving money to Russia because we are taking their oil, and that money is using to kill Ukrainians. I think that idea of inflicting those ideas into the situation is quite different, because we have 1.4 billion population, and energy security is one of the prime concerns for the India. If anybody gets a cheap oil, and India is getting that cheap oil, so what is wrong in that buying that cheap oil? And in fact, that cheap oil is being processed by Indian, and it goes again to the West. I think that is the West's hypocrisy to saying that we are close to Russia, and then we should impose a tariff in that. I think the two relationships, India, Russia, and India, United States, are on its own merit, away from each other. It does not have much association. US is equally an important partner for the India, same as Russia is equally Indian partner. The two relationships should be seen in different angle, not through the one prism.
Okay, and just lastly, Tawqueer, I mean, you've talked about oil, and obviously that's a really important part of the trading relationship between India and Russia. We've got oil going one way. I think 36% of India's total crude imports last year came from Russia. What's heading the other way? What's India sending to Russia?
As of now, that is one of the point that the two leaders discussed in this annual summit. You know, there is a trade gap, that the trade deficit is widening because India is buying a lot of Russian oil, and on this other side, we mostly used to give the service sector to the Russia, but because of the conflict, that service sector is not doing well, and there are other issues. So there is a trade gap is widening. So what India is now, what they are promoting as of now is that, you know, in this segment we had the agreements on the fertilizers, we had the agreements in terms of the mobility and the labor migration, which is much required in Russia. That was a prime concern and the prime agenda for this annual summit. I think there will be a skilled migration. You know, India has a huge pool of the skilled workers. They will be migrated and they will be sent to their jobs for Russia. I think that was a prime aspect of this relationship, and one of the major agreements that took place between the two countries. I think that is one of the things that India is going to send to the Russia. And besides that, having the service sector, there are a lot of other things. Pharmaceuticals, like the Indian company is going to build its bases in the India. India is already a pharma capital of the world. So our companies will be going to produce medicines in Russia. That is one of the agreements that has happened. So I think in that sense, we are somehow trying to balance that trade deficit so that the relationship, that's why there is a target of the $100 billion trade by 2030. I think that is how India is going to minimize that trade balance and keep this relationship floating.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for your time. We've run out of time. Tawqueer, Hussain, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much for having me.
That is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Look forward to seeing you again tomorrow. We'll have some more exclusive interviews for you then. Until then, bye-bye.